This is by Shock, Shot and Faith. You can see here that I've taken the game down for the moment. We'd got to turn 8, and I'd become increasingly puzzled about the complete lack of progress, movement or casualties on either side. This attacking force had not suffered a single step loss in 8 turns, 2.5 hours of supposedly bloody fighting, not a single step loss. The defenders had 2 units removed, maybe 200 casualties, and a couple of step losses on other units, maybe 300 or 400 casualties, and no casualties. And I started to think that something was perhaps going wrong in terms of the rules. If we come over here on the combat table, it's a differential table. In other words, it's not odds based. You take your modified combat value and you subtract the defender's modified combat value if you're the attacker, and you end up with on this table. And then you roll a 6-sided dice and you cross-reference that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6, and you get a result. Disruption, automatic disruption, quality check, nothing, a step loss and a leader loss check for the star, and only if you've got 6 and you roll a 1 or a 2 can you cause 2 step losses, and only if you on 3 other results can you cause 1 step loss as the attacker, assuming you're not trying to attack on -6 and get yourself killed. But the only step loss results here are 3 or 4, +3 or +4 rolling a 1 or a 2, +5 rolling a 1 or a 2, and +6 or more rolling 1, 2, 3 or 4. Those are the only ways to cause casualties. So if we just grabbed 2 equal sort of units, like this arquebusier here, 3 combat strength, D class, 4 movement points, and we drop his opposite number down here from the Huguenots, 3d4. When these attack each other, they're the same class, no leadership modifiers, no terrain modifiers, it's clear terrain. They're just firing at each other, or fighting each other with a combat strength of 3 and a combat strength of 3. That's a net 0. And that means that they can stand there for turn after turn, and you know, that's a quality check for each side, and that one passes and that one passes, so nothing happens. And that 6 on this table is nothing happens, that's another turn passes, and that's a 1, so they're both automatically disordered. And then that's a 5, but with them both disordered they just be on 2 strength now, they're still on a net 0, that's another turn passes, and that's another turn passes, and that's another turn passes. And you see they've just been fighting now for an hour and a half or more, and all that's happened is that each side is disordered. They haven't even taken a step loss yet, and they've been fighting an hour and a half. You know, so now imagine that we do this, and we add all these as backup. You're still only nominating a lead unit, and it's still only that lead unit that can take casualties. So now we have this situation, and they've been fighting an hour and a half, but the actual combat modifiers and everything, these aren't contributing anything in support because they're all firepower units, and so they can't support. So you've got, you know, 2,000 arquebusiers on either side ostensibly fighting each other, and for an hour and a half all they've done is cause a disruption. And then the problem is that if they've got any sense, they say, oh, those guys are disrupted, so in their phases they sidle them back out of the way, and now they keep fighting with these guys, and that doesn't do anything for an hour and a half, and in that following an hour and a half these guys get reorganised, and say, oh great lads, we're back in the fight. And you just go through this cycle of disrupted units doing that, and a new unit getting put up as the front line, and these guys getting recycled back in once they've been reorganised, and essentially they can fight these two stacks here with this combat table, could fight all day and nothing would happen. They literally could fight all day and you would not get a result. And that is very odd, very odd. The chances of someone making a breakthrough here are zero. Just it's just not going to happen. So that is one problem that we've got. This combat table simply will not produce you decisive results. The only way you can get up here on the combat table is by having an incredibly tough unit with support fighting quite a weak one. That's the only way. And the problem I had when I was playing is that I was including the optional or the advanced rules order system. And the trouble with the orders system is that it gives virtually no benefit to the attacker. If you have an attack order, you get +1 to your combat rating. Big deal, we're on the top column anyway. Step loss substitution forbidden is dreadful. That means that we can't retreat. We have to take our step losses instead of retreating. And we get +1 to our combat rating, which is pretty much useless. If we go back to the combat table and we look at the difference between rolling on the 0 column, for example, disorganised both sides, quality check both sides, no effect both sides. If we move up to the 1-2 table, disorganised both sides, quality check both sides, 0 quality check. So on a third of the results, instead of we benefit by having no effect on us, and the opponent has to take a quality check, which depending on their quality, like if they're high quality units, is no advantage at all. Moving from the 1 column to the 2 column is no advantage at all, So a +1 on our combat rating for having an attack order is pitiful. Whereas if we have a skirmish order, we can change a step loss into a disorganised for no negative effects at all. No effect on our movement, no effect on our ability to engage or attack or move towards the enemy or anything. We can simply change a step loss into a disruption. Yeah? If we take, say, a retreat order, no effect on our ability to move, no effect on our ability to engage, no effect on our ability to attack, but we can prevent any step losses by retreating two game zones, even two-step losses. Yeah. Now I can come to reaction in a bit, but this simply means, imagine this in this situation. No one with skirmish orders, no one is ever causing losses, ever. Even if you add a really, really tough unit into this stack, so they're all firepower. Let's take our hardest charging cavalry unit, and we add it into this stack like this, yeah? Even then, he's got 5, 6, 7, 8 against 3. Okay, he might be on the 5 column now. In fact, he'd only be on the 4 column because he's class E against class D. So even that is only putting him on the 4 column. But if these guys have got some sort of skirmish order, they can laugh off his step loss, turn it into a disruption, do exactly the same cycling round through their units as they were doing before. Yeah? So, there's a fundamental inertia in the combat tables which says you're not going anywhere. You can't achieve breakthroughs, and it's almost as if these troops are fighting with, rubber weapons. They might as well be, LARPing with foam weapons for all the threat they pose to each other. It's really, really strange. So, having said that, and having rambled on for a while, I'm just going to do a little bit of recharging of the camera and come back with a couple of things that I have been doing wrong, which is why I packed the game up, and I'm planning to give it another shot to see if we can do anything any differently. Okay, so here at Shock, Shot and Faith, La Roche L'Abeille, the only other thing I could find that I was getting significantly wrong in the combat rules was that if you are marked as disordered, let's say you've got this guy here and he's marked as disordered, he can't then, if he's attacked by something and let's just zoom out slightly here, if he's then attacked by something and takes a casualty, which he couldn't possibly do in this case because he'd need to be attacked by something far, far stronger, but let's say he was attacked like this and took a casualty, he can't retreat to trade the casualty off for another disordered. He has to take the step loss. So you can't retreat when you're disordered, and therefore you can't mitigate combat results when you're disordered. And that may have had an impact in the game that I was playing, although I still think the stacks are going to be deep enough that you're just going to be able to cycle back your disordered units and put fresh ones in the line. So I'm not sure that had a terribly significant impact, but I do think the orders system was having a really, really slowing effect on the game, and that combined with the fact that I was just getting those little things wrong and little marginal things wrong in reaction fire and reaction cavalry charges, although they were barely used, because if you're outclassed and you're having to go 1-to-1 because there's no support in a reaction fire, so you're having to go 1-to-1 with a 6A enemy unit and you're 2D, you're just inviting them to mug you in their turn when they then get to attack you again. So reaction fire is often, suicidal, as is reaction charging. A lot of the reaction stuff is actually only of benefit if you're on the attack. So yeah, that's also slightly weird. You would never reaction fire these guys into a unit that was moving into you like this, because he's just going to get his monster attack on you instigated by you, and then he's going to get it again instigated by him because it's his turn. He's moved in here. You've said, okay, come and attack me. My combat value is 2, and I'm class D, and yours is 6, and yours is class A. Oh look, you're attacking me on the +5 column. Oh, once you've done that, have another go. It's just implausible that you'd even consider that. Whereas this guy here, if the Arquebusier moved in, he'd be quite happy to reaction fire. He'd say, come on then, I'm going to have my 5 attack against you. But unless you're the super strong unit, you're not going to instigate out of sequence attacks for the other player then to exploit in the remainder of their turn. So yeah, there's quite a lot in this that you scratch your head and think, how am I meant to use that in any way usefully or effectively? And as you've seen in my first attempt at this, all that happened is that the two armies got completely bogged down and kind of shrugged and went, we're not getting anywhere here. We're not even causing each other casualties. We're getting so little done, we may as well go home and have a cup of tea. Okay, here we go then. We're back in turn 1 at La Roche L'Abeille. And we're going to try something different. So we know what happens if we send our cavalry in here. It all gets really bogged down in this horrible stream and these villages and this windmill and these slopes and trapped between these woods, and it can't really effectively, it's trying to struggle to get up these hills, and it's really quite hard going. Let's try something different then, because all this open ground over here looks quite tempting. So we're going to try and get Coligny to swing out down through between these woods and cross the stream here and come back round into this ground over here, aiming to cause havoc in the rear of these guys. And then we'll send our arquebusiers and argelets, our lighter troops down in here, just to hold these guys and harass them and see if we can get anything going, while we get our cavalry in position to come down and try and mash them up. So let's try that, knowing that our heavy infantry can then storm in here if they haven't been reinforced. Our heavy infantry can storm in here and try to start cutting these people up, and our cavalry can hopefully cut off any reinforcements, and we'll try and destroy them in detail by using our cavalry to cut off the other half of the Catholic army, and then engage them with our light forces and bring our heavy infantry on to see if they can rough these guys up. So that's our new plan, having played through this once and got nowhere. As I said, I've stopped using the leader rules, so we can't use leaders to mitigate losses anymore, and we understand that we can't retreat disorganised units, and that reaction fire is, well, a bit of a waste of time. So off we go. So after 2 turns of this rerun of La Roche L'Abeille, with based on some slightly different understanding, we've reached this position here with the Huguenots pushing only a token force towards this difficult stream here, and the Catholics barricading it with a token force, and then most of the Huguenot forces headed round onto this flank to try and get into this open ground, and some of them up over here, and of course the Catholic cavalry and pikemen starting to move into position, coming through these woods along this road and starting to fan out into position to oppose them. Is it any more interesting? Well, I don't think I've rolled a single combat yet, but I'm just trying to see whether this is even a viable strategy. But it doesn't look like it is, because we haven't got in here fast enough to bottle up the cavalry and infantry that can just move straight round along this road without any problem at all and break out into this open ground themselves. So we're certainly not going to trap this bunch of troops separate from the rest of their army, which was the original plan, to try and get in here and cut them off. But we're a turn too late, and there's no way to do it quicker. So here's where we are. I'm halfway through turn 4 here in La Roche L'Abeille, one of the battles in by Jacques, Jean and Faith. And the first step loss has just occurred, so halfway through turn 4. So do we have a more bloody and decisive battle going on now that I'm making full use of the rules as I understand them? No, we don't. We've had 1 step loss in there, and we've had 1 step loss in there. Painful step losses nonetheless, both on cavalry units, but 2 step losses in 4.5 turns. Do we have a more dynamic battle? Yes, we probably do. The way that the lead Huguenot Protestant stack has pushed forward right up here didn't look like it had closed off access between the 2 halves of the Catholic army, but actually when you start looking at it, with these disruptions in place, these guys are really struggling to start to find areas where they can move back, not adjacent, to reorganize. Because these guys are adjacent. There's a spot there, even though these Huguenots are disorganized, and so they have to be trying to pull back down into this area. Now the pikemen's leader is way over here. They've got cavalry up here they had cavalry up here who were disorganized with the leader down here, and they ended up with cavalry in here that couldn't reorganize, and that's how they took casualties. Pikemen struggling to get back along this road because they've only got 3 move, and there's a 2 movement point cost to go across here, and you're -1 when you're disorganized, so it's very tough to make it back in this direction and it's not the fact that the leader's over here, it's the fact that you have to be over here to be non-adjacent. So these units are causing, especially this lead unit here, but this one too, are causing major problems to the Catholics trying to get their reorganisation cycle going. So yeah, it's more interesting. It's no less bloody. They still feel like they're fighting a little bit with foam weapons, but we'll see if these reorganisations start, or disorganisations kind of mount up when you can't reorganise quite so easily. As you can see down here, what we've got going on down here is what happens when reorganisation is easy and you just retreat off the front line and your leaders pretty much reorganise you and throw you back in. No casualties, no difficulties, and a bit of a standoff. So it's a question of, at the moment, of what the Catholic forces can do to get more of a foothold in this area, and they've got opportunities here with this guy disorganised to maybe push him back if they can find some stuff to attack with into here. And like was here, there's only 1 solitary cavalry unit holding this, and they'd love to pick these kind of units off while they're kind of alone and not stacked with loads of other stuff. I've just come into turn 9 here at La Roche L'Abeille in Par le Feu, Le Fer et la Foi by Shot and Faith. And yeah, so the Huguenots have not really been able to sustain the pressure against these pikemen. Eventually the Ritas failed the odd quality check and were forced to withdraw to regroup, and then the weaker cavalry that they've got with them didn't have support anymore. Instead of providing support to the Ritas, they were pretty much unsupported, and then these 6B pikemen can take a pop at them and with multiple attacks slowly wear them down, and these guys are going to have to withdraw this turn because they're both disrupted now from attacks from the pikemen around them, and they're going to have to withdraw, and some weakened Huguenot forces are going to have to take up station here just to stop them moving forward and garrisoning this area. And it's all nonsense. There's no one is taking any casualties at all. You get disrupted, you withdraw, you regroup, you go back in again. The enemy gets disrupted, they withdraw, they regroup, they come back in again. It's all completely inert. It's like two balloons just rubbing against each other, but neither of them ever pop. There's just nothing that ever happens. I think there's about there have been, this is the casualty piles for both sides. There you go, those are the Catholic casualties and those are the Huguenot casualties. You can see, yeah, exactly. This is in turn 9. There have been about 4 step losses on the Catholic side. Now, interestingly, the designer emailed me on Board Game Geek to explain to me how few casualties, how unlethal combat was in this era, and how difficult it was to actually produce decisive battles or engagements, and how sort of non-professional armies were, tended not to stick around and fight to the last man and fight for their lives, which is fine as far as it goes, except that if you let both sides simply recycle their units quicker than they can become disrupted by the enemy, you end up with this bullshit where nothing can possibly ever happen, which is what we've got. And secondly, if you're going to claim that battles in this period had low mortality rates and low casualty rates, you can't then make 73 of the 78 available victory points conditional on causing casualties. You can't then make 69 of the 78 victory points available to the Huguenots conditional upon casualties, and you certainly cannot call a decisive victory greater than 25 victory points of casualties when it isn't possible to cause more than 2 victory points worth of casualties in the 12 turns available. If your system doesn't allow you to cause casualties, then asking for 25 victory points worth of casualties to win the game is a complete fucking joke. So I can understand if you're going to say that, well, battles in this era weren't particularly bloody, then firstly you need to find ways that troops are going to rout, and secondly you're going to need to find victory conditions that reflect the realities of battle and aren't based on slaughtering the enemy, which you claim didn't happen. As it stands, the game doesn't work. The game doesn't work. I'm sorry to say. It has a lot of nice facets about it. The movement is really nice. The graphic design is lovely. The graphics themselves, the maps themselves, the fonts, the choice of borders, the colour scheme, the turn track, the player aids, even the rules aren't bad. The rules are pretty clear and unambiguous and, a bit different, but once you get used to them, you can live with them. But this combat table is shite. It needs rewriting. The entire combat rules need rewriting. It simply doesn't work. The combat system has to reflect, if combat wasn't bloody, then the combat table has to reflect something other than pure casualties. It has to reflect fear, morale loss, unwillingness to fight further, fatigue, and it has to get things off the fucking battlefield so that one side or the other can make progress. But as it stands, that isn't possible. It simply isn't possible. And I'm not playing any more of this to keep proving it. I've played 9 turns of it, and I refuse to play any more of a game of a war game where combat is irrelevant. So I'm going to call this a day now. I may well house rule it. I may well house rule it. If you house ruled it so that the results from the combat applied to every unit that took part, so your lead unit and your support units, suddenly you wouldn't be able to reorganise them quicker than you could disorganise them. If units that weren't participating in a defending hex, let's say this hex was defending and this guy was the lead unit and the guy underneath him couldn't support and so wasn't even participating, if this guy leaves the hex, I would be sticking casualties on this guy. I would be giving him a straight step loss. He wasn't participating, this guy was forced to retreat, the whole thing was overrun. I'd stick losses on him at the very least, and maybe losses and retreats on him. So there are things that you could do, tweaks that you could do, house rules that you could do, that you could bring in, that would completely change the dynamic of combat in this and actually reach the point where a side could hope with some reasonably careful play to be effective. But with careful play, you reach a complete static nonsense. These armies are pretty much frictionless. They do nothing to the enemy. They're armed with foam weapons and paintball guns. It's just silly, and I can't recommend anyone coming in and spending time on it or money on it in its current state.